Turkey's economic situation is not looking good. While the Turkish lira may seem a bit flat now, it has been artificially manipulated by President Erdogan for far too long. Now, this is nothing new throughout history. We've seen this even in the 15th century with King Edward VIII in the Great Debasement, where essentially the sterling had held around 92% purity rates, and throughout a couple of years, essentially what he did was drop that from 92% to below 25% without any of the citizens knowing. Now, that was before all these things we have now with crazy complicated economic theories, but that's just one example of how this is not new. What Erdogan is doing is not new at all, even though he's kind of bringing about all these schemes. What he's been avoiding for the longest time is what's traditionally been shown as how to lower inflation, which is raising interest rates. When you raise interest rates, essentially what you're doing is you're incentivizing saving, which is so important. Now, with lower interest rates, you're incentivizing spending because borrowing is much easier, right? So if a new business wants to come and get a loan, the interest rates are very, very low. Someone wants to get a loan for a house, whatever it is, the interest rates are low, it's easy to do, so it's then easier to spend, right? You have that incentive. But when the interest rates are higher, you're incentivized to save and not to spend. So he's been avoiding this for far too long, and any of the central bank heads that have tried to come in and actually fix this problem, he is fired. I spent a lot of last year in Turkey, actually, and experienced a lot of this myself. I love Turkey. It's an incredible country. I spent around 2 months in Istanbul, and then my last month just kind of driving around Turkey, around kind of the border around Syria. But I love the country overall, and I think it's quite sad what's going on. So in this video, I'm really going to be breaking down this new scheme, why I think this is completely wrong, and basically just an overview of why inflation happens in these situations. You know, I was just hanging out with some Venezuelans the other day. I'm here in Bogota, Colombia, and you know, they've experienced it. It's happened here in Colombia. It's really, really sad because essentially what happens is the citizens have no control over this. Most of them don't care about the economy. Most of them, all they do care about family, friends, and their work. That's the main stuff. And then the people kind of in these, you know, closed door rooms, kind of behind the curtains, they make these decisions, and those end up hurting kind of the little guy, if you will, and benefiting a lot of the people that have their money in assets. So that's why a lot of what I talk about on this channel is inflation hedge assets. And also, by the way, if you want an overview of this, I did do a video when I was in Panama in this jungle here. It's kind of interesting. Like near the end of the video, I see this like leopard, but I break down kind of a very, very basic overview, kind of a summary of the history of Turkey's kind of economic collapse and why it was worsening at that time, why this massive spike happened because of that kind of previous scheme, which is still going on, which I'll discuss and kind of recap in this video. But just a basic overview of the Turkish lira versus the US dollar. So this may be an interesting chart to look at, but in my personal opinion, what is more important, and a lot of what I discuss on this channel, is inflation hedge assets. So for example, let's look at the Turkish lira versus Bitcoin, right? Or we could do the Turkish lira versus gold. That's one way I like to look at the stock market. For example, instead of just in US dollar terms, look at it in gold terms, and you'll see it's basically the complete opposite, right? So in US dollar terms, it's up and to the right. In gold terms, it's down and to the right. So kind of two completely different ways of looking at it. But if we go BTC, TRY, we can look at Bitcoin versus Turkish lira, and it's even worse, right? So the volatility is even worse here. It's pretty bad, honestly. Like, this is not something we want to see, but it's what ends up happening. That's why I think storing your wealth in some sort of inflation hedge assets and really having a balanced portfolio plan is very, very important. That's what I talk about a lot on this channel. Now, to this new kind of scheme that they pulled out is really kind of sad, actually, because in Turkey, gold is one of these things that's looked at historically as like they give it for gifts at birthdays, at weddings, and it has like a very, very rich history. You know, Istanbul was once Constantinople. They have the Grand Bazzar there, kind of this oldest and largest version of a free market system where you can come in, you can barter, you can trade. There's no price controls like we've actually seen recently in Turkey, which is quite sad. Again, I break down all those things and more in that video. I'm not going to bore you too much with that in this one because I did cover that there. But they basically talk about this, you know, over 25 billion just in Ankara of hidden metal currency in the latest scheme. So essentially what they're trying to do is get citizens to basically like give their gold for Turkish lira and have a little bit of incentive built in there. It's really quite sad. They like actually released this plan like what was it, about a week ago, something like that. I think it was on the 8th of February. Basically made this trip talking about this, basically saying that, you know, the government hoped that 10 cents per the estimated $250 billion worth of gold kept by Turks in their home would be converted into lira. Again, this is the completely wrong thing to do, right? We saw this in the U.S., which is terrible, I think, when they tried to seize all their gold. We've seen this in a lot of other places, but essentially when governments try and seize an asset or seize anything, they kind of just exposes what they're trying to do, right? It exposes they did something wrong because it should be your own individual right to what you have, right? So why are you forced to store your wealth in Turkish lira? Like, you didn't choose to be born in Turkey, right? Nobody chooses to be born there. You could, if you wanted to, you could store your wealth in Russian rubles. That's why personally, when I'm looking at different currencies around the world, I like to have different bank accounts and store kind of different wealth in different places if you're looking at just individual currencies, but then also in a lot of different assets. So it's very important that you understand this, right? So if your only perspective is like, you're born in the US, so you just save in US dollars. maybe that's just one way of thinking, but then kind of expand that and go, maybe I think Georgia's a great place to go. For example, Georgia and Armenia, I've made videos on offshore banking there, but along with this, there's a lot of other amazing concepts, like, for example, today's sponsor, Apollo FinTech. I've been working with them for some time now. They have gold secured currency, which is basically combining blockchain technology and gold backing. So it really fits in well with this video. I have a full in-depth video on why I partnered up with them. They do a lot in emerging market economies to provide blockchain solutions, especially in Africa. And gold secured currency is quite interesting. So again, it's kind of combining those two things. So it's actually physically backed by gold. They have land mineral rights. I was just speaking with a member of the team. They're doing a lot of interesting things in Zimbabwe. They, again, kind of combining these two things is fascinating to me. And along with this whole idea, I think it's really interesting to look at, okay, for example, Bitcoin. So if the government wanted to see someone's Bitcoin versus their gold, that really proves an incredible use case of crypto, of Bitcoin, for example, because at the end of the day, what can they really do? They can't physically do anything to you. As long as you know your private key, you know your mnemonic phrase, you have it. There is no stealing it from you, unless you obviously give that to them, which would be, you would have to do that. So they can't come into your home and, like, let's say you have gold stored on your mattress. Let's say things escalate in Turkey, their whole saving situation doesn't go well, and they need to kind of forcefully take the gold, which hopefully doesn't happen again. They wouldn't be able to do that with Bitcoin. So I find that quite interesting, especially with the whole situation of governments kind of learning more about this. I think right now they're kind of in the dark, mostly completely, when it comes to these things. But this is just fascinating to me. So I'm curious what you guys think. Do you think that Turkey will kind of escalate this? How do you find this play out? Let me know in the comments. We also have a Telegram group that we can discuss in, but this article also lays it out quite well. So Turkey's finance ministers allows gold saving scheme. So again, they have around $250 billion worth. And one of the massive problems with this, like what happened right here, is this their basically saving situation. So this is kind of their saving scheme, where basically the interest rate was around 14% when this massive kind of rise in the Turkish lira happened, towards the positive way, right? So they kind of recovered a lot because of this whole scheme. Erdogan's like, this is going to save the whole situation. We're still not going to raise interest rates. We're still not going to do what is best, shown throughout all economic history, but instead we have this kind of new plan that we came up ourselves because we're the smartest people ever, which again, it's like their own kind of economic theory, which didn't really work out, because basically what they were saying is, an easy to understand way, let's just say you put $100 in. So for example, which is 100 Turkish lira. So at the end of the year, if it was 14% interest rate, right, you'd have 140 Turkish lira. But let's say that Turkish lira dropped around 50%, so you would need what, 280 Turkish lira just to have that same amount. So basically what they would say is, if you lock your money up for 12 months, right, so you can't release this, essentially what we would do is we would cover that debasement or inflation. But the problem is, these kind of government-backed plans, what if they run out of money, right? So what if foreign exchange reserves aren't there at the end of those 12 months? Well, do they go bad on their promise, or do they, how do you fix that situation? Well, there's really two main things you can do then. You can raise taxes, or you can print more money. So you can basically inject more Turkish lira into the economy, which, again, that's just debasing it even more. So yes, you're getting more, but in the long run, you're hurting people, and that just kind of spirals into hyperinflation, in my personal opinion. Now with this new scheme, they're trying to get gold, which kind of is fixed assets. I wouldn't be surprised if, honestly, they try and take crypto and do the same thing, because they need to do something, right? So they've kind of done this thing where some exchange places, they try and have around 25% saved, so it doesn't, so they don't really go below that. And I think it's just fascinating what's going on there. Beyond this, I did want to touch on this. So I discussed it in the previous video, but these price controls are quite sad. I love the Grand Bazzar in Turkey. It's one of my favorite things. I visited a ton of times. I was going to do a video. I'll definitely go back to Turkey and do a video on this, like buying gold in the Grand Bazzar, which again, it's like the oldest and largest covered market in the world, which is fascinating. So again, it represents a free market, and that's why it's quite sad to see this. The Turkish people are amazing. Again, I absolutely love it. They're very, very passionate. They love to barter at these places, and for me, that's interesting, because that's the way it should be, right? There really shouldn't be price controls, because this article actually lays it out really, really well. Because of these price controls, actually at this point in time, this was like around the end of last year, they basically talked about, many Turks can't afford bread and bakers can't afford to make it because of the price controls. It's not because in a free market situation, the bakers would be able to go, like the people that basically all the commodities you need to make bread, which is not that many commodities, you'd be able to buy that at market price, and then from there you'd be able to charge a little bit of a premium to sell it to the Turkish people, right? So at the end of the day, that's how a free market should work. But when you start artificially manipulating that situation, like Erdogan has done in the macro in the Turkish lira, in the micro, let's say for bread, for wheat, you kind of artificially manipulate that and have price controls. Well, look at all the other times you've had price controls throughout history in all these different places. It's never turned out well, right? So that's something that's very, very important to understand. I think, again, it's quite sad. This article kind of lays out the Great Debasement quite well, so I'll just recap this and then I'll end out the video. Also, this is kind of like an article on Turkish gold and its historical value kind of in history. Maybe I'll include this down below in the description. Also, I'll have timestamps and links to everything down there. But I found this really, really interesting, actually. So the Great Debasement and its aftermath. I kind of talked about this a little bit in the beginning, but I'll just read through this really quick. So beginning in 1544, first I'm going to have a little bit of cacao. Between 1544 and 1551, Henry VIII and Edward VI systematically debased the currency, replacing precious metal contents in the coins with base metals, for the sake of fiscal profits. With rapid population growth in the early 16th century sustaining the monetary supply, and with his military endeavors in France, Scotland, and Ireland producing fiscal pressure, Henry turned to exploiting his coinage after he had already exhausted bounteous resources which had required dissolution of the monasteries. Now, one thing to kind of relate this to Turkey's situation. When I was there, I specifically remember so many people talking about, like, if I ask any of the locals, like, what is the thing about Erdogan? Most people, again, they don't care about economic policy. They don't even know about it, right? It's boring to them. That's why, for me, these things interest me. That's why I do this channel. I don't make, like, really money off this channel. This is just kind of, like, my passion. This is for fun. I do partner up with sponsors because I really enjoy working with them. But at the end of the day, most people, what they would say about Erdogan is, it's not even the Turkish Lira situation. It's not even the monetary policy. It's where he's allocating capital to. So he allocated capital to all these kind of, I guess you would say, like, flashy things. So these, like, beautiful, obviously monetaries are incredible, don't get me wrong, but he would kind of allocate capital to that and not education. And education is so, so important in my opinion. A lot of the world's lacking. I think the education system is very, very messed up in a lot of places, especially, you know, in emerging market countries, but even in the U.S. It's quite sad to see. I think there's a massive, massive misallocation of capital where there should be a lot more focus on kind of critical thinking instead of this kind of weird, I guess, like, new think way. Anyways, I don't want to get too much into that, but it kind of fits in with this, right? So if you look at how they're allocating capital as a leader and the people going, okay, well, you should be looking for our own interests. That's why I'm a little bit more libertarian in the way that I think. Obviously, I'm not really right or left in that way, but I just would like to think rationally. And this is a great example of one that has happened throughout history. So debasement has been quite common and quite severe throughout much of medieval Europe, especially in France. But it has been essentially non-existent in England from the 13th and 16th century. For approximately 400 years, England has maintained 92.5% purity for the sterling. But with Henry's debasement, the purity of coins gradually dropped to 75%, then to 50%, to 30%, and finally to 25%. And a 1551 issue under Edward VI contained only 17% of these sterlings. That's crazy. Pre-debasement issues. That is absolutely insane. So anyways, that was that article. I don't want to spend too much more on this, but I really appreciate anyone who's made it this far. Let me know in the comments if you have made it this far. I'm planning to pump out many more videos on these things, kind of on macro. If you have any video topics you would like me to cover, you can either let me know in the Telegram group or in the comments. You can follow us on Twitter at investglobal_IO. You can support us by liking the video, subscribe to the channel, stay up to date with the notification bell, and all. Invest Global, and until next time.